still working on engineering.
Yeah.
That's the office. I mean, he's slow now, but see, well, I think that's who they would work. Yeah, I'm sure that we need a slot.
Let's go ahead and get started. Does anyone need one of these fingers?
Thank you. Oh, music? Thank you.
Sorry. Sharon, do you need a slide? Yes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today we will discuss emails, memos. Specifically, we'll talk about your email and memo assignment that I think are due in 2 weeks and 3 weeks from now. We'll do some best practices with emails, best practices with memos. We'll expand that conversation to think about a lot of messaging, such as text messaging and social media messaging. We'll look at some examples of how that can be effective and how that can be less effective. And then we'll conclude with a discussion of the Dell case, how that company used social media strategy in that level of communications. Now, did everything go well with the Dell communications case? Everyone was able to download that? Good, that worked out okay? Okay, good. You actually want to work for Dell, right? All right, okay, hope that's going well. So, we'll start with emails, we'll move on to memos. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I don't think you know how to write an email. I just want to share some best practices and think about how violating some of the traditional rules of emails and memos can make us look bad as communicators and as young professionals. So with that, I'll just start off with a sample email. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to work our way down. Of course, at the top of the email, we're writing this email to someone. We'll address it to one person, we'll address it to multiple people. A couple questions I want to pose. First thing, suppose you are writing multiple people in this email. Does anyone have any opinions on the order you might put those recipients in? Jim?
I always usually, it's just what I do, I put like my boss first usually, and then if it's going to somebody else, like another attorney, I'll put them afterwards. So kind of by seniority.
Okay, what if the person that it's going to afterwards is more senior than your boss?
I'll put them first.
Okay, so seniority is the metric. Anyone else have any ideas?
I think, your email to my Japanese customers and leaders. In this situation, I recruit my customers in first place, and according to their levels, for example, senior managers and the lower all to customers in the very first position, and then put the people in our company.
Okay, good. So customers first position, people in your company later, and within customers and within people in your company, do you prioritize them?
According to level.
According to seniority?
Yeah.
Okay, so seniority, we've got seniorities with customers first, and then employees second. Priya? Okay, I've heard this before. Alphabet. So give us the case for alphabetical order.
Well, even when you're hitting assignments that are like group projects or things like that, I don't know, I just think it makes it takes any personal opinion out of the equation.
Okay, good. So people might not be offended if you put everything in alphabetical order. It's just alphabetical, unless they have a complex about having a last name that starts with W or Z, and alphabetical again, like grade school over again. Arpit?
Sometimes people won't realize that it's in alphabetical order.
Yes. Suppose you only have 3 people in this email, and they don't realize it's in alphabetical order, and they get offended that you put someone who is several levels below them, before them. I would agree that could be a problem. Grace? Okay. Relevance to the issue. So these are all great ideas. The one thing I would definitely consider you keeping, or recommend you keep in mind, is some people expect seniority. So if you put someone who is lower level first, then they might be offended by that. If you're sure they won't be offended, you're sure that they'll understand that the person you're putting first is more relevant to this email, that's fine. If you think they'll understand that alphabetical order is a way to make this general and make sure no one gets offended, that's a good strategy as well. I just want to bring it to your attention and give you a context for discussing it. Second thing I want to ask about this, who we're sending emails to, suppose there are multiple people that are being sent to. When do we utilize the reply back to the sender? When do we utilize the reply all option? Pretty?
When we know that the email was not, email was actually intended to you, but FYI for the rest of the people, so it is expected from you that if there is any update, it should be done as a reply all, then we will do it.
So if it was intended for you, but just an update to everyone else, then you should do a reply all?
If there is some constructive thing happening over it, so it is again an FYI to those people, and to the person who sent it.
Okay. Very good, Jim.
I just did this before I left actually for class. If, like my boss asked me to send our manager something, so I sent it to him and then replied all, so she knew that I sent it to him.
Okay, so it's relevant to the person. They need to know that you sent it to your boss, so you include them in the reply all. Okay.
What I usually do is if the sender, sent it to me and someone else, that's probably on purpose. So I usually do reply all. The only time I only do reply to the sender is if I have a question or an opinion that's only related to that one person that I'm sending the email.
Okay, so I'm hearing good analysis. If it's not related to everyone who's on that to field, then you want to be cautious about using the reply all option. It could send the wrong message. One, that you don't understand that this reply all is not relevant to certain people. And two, it just could be a waste of the recipient's time. You could say, who is this hotshot MBA that's wasting my time with this reply all? I'm intrigued.
Sometimes it happens that a person includes so many people in the CC and CC section and Q section that they are actually not related to the mail. So in that case, we try to remove them out of the mail.
Oh, okay, so they're not relevant, so they're getting much of...
It often happens that it used to happen when I was working that if you appreciate and even if you are giving an award to somebody, and there is people would write CC, mention the entire team. I was in Mumbai, so all the people from Mumbai would be in the CC. So if your friend has got an award, so people would frequently reply all on that, and then reply all, and on reply all.
Yes. You have all these emails in your inbox. You try to sort through them, and you realize that most of them are not relevant to you. A colleague of mine summed it up this way: there's a special place in hell for those who reply all unnecessarily. One, it wastes people's time, and two, more important for you all to keep in mind, is someone could think you don't understand that the message is not relevant to them. You're supposed to be this hotshot MBA that they're paying a lot of money for. Let's move on to this next field, CC. I have a question for you all. Who knows what CC actually stands for? Raise your hand if you know what it actually stands for. Okay, raise your hand if you do not know what it actually stands for. All right, good. So most of the class do not know what it actually stands for. I think I'm going to reflect on this point. I'm at the beginning of my teaching career here. As the years go by, I think even fewer people will know what CC actually stands for. Can someone tell us what CC stands for and when we use it, Paula?
Carbon copy.
Okay, and when do we use it?
When we want to copy somebody because we want them to know, or like we said, if you want your boss to know that you had completed what they had requested. And
Yes.
then that's it, right?
So just kind of keeping them in the loop rather than a direct involvement.
Then exactly.
Yes. Does anyone who knew what CC stood for, has anyone like seen an old-fashioned carbon copy memo or carbon copy letter? A couple of people have seen it? I remember my elementary school years and years ago, they had a carbon copy machine maker or whatever it was. So it had the top page on the top was in white. And then it had this carbon copy in between, and the second page was like pink, or the third page was yellow, the fourth page was blue. So if you were to receive one of those CC pages, you just have this very clear visual indication that you are not central to this project. You are tangential. You are being kept in the loop with a piece of paper that is yellow or blue and has these carbon copy smudges on it. So it's not as obvious when we do it in email, but still it can be problematic if you get those mixed up. Has anyone received an email where they felt they should have been CC'd, but they were actually in the to subject or the to field of the email, or vice versa? Yeah, how does it make you feel, Darren? What are the problems with that?
It depends on the situation. So sometimes I work overseas and trying to get the email and CC the things different over there, but I have to always CC the leaders of my company, and if I CC them in the wrong order, they get upset at me.
Okay, so order is important, yes.
And if I forget something from the staff that should have been on D2 instead of CC, they also get upset at me
Why do they get upset?
because they want to be put on email.
And not the CC?
Yes, not, no,
Right.
they can't be put in CC because the CC is reserved for the leadership, like for the management. Like you cannot CC any other people unless you like that. So that was how.
Like you
that's
literally can't? Like you can't put it in the...
It really depends, but most of the work that I've done, I have to CC the management, so like the VPs and things, and they all want to be in the CC box, unless it's actually addressed to them. So,
All right, so everyone wants to be in, you're saying everyone wants to be in the CC field, and less, is that what you're saying?
no, actually.
So I think he's saying he's only allowed to CC.
Yeah, I'm allowed to only CC some specific people who are actually the management.
And others have to be in the two.
Right, and if I leave them out in the two field, they get upset.
Okay, so you're only allowed to CC management.
Right,
Others have to be in the to field.
right.
And so if you leave them out, they get upset. That's another little wrinkle. Let's come back to that.
And just add one more point, and if I CC the order wrong of the management, let's say if I CC the junior VP in front of the senior VP,
Yes, all right, right.
that's that ain't in a big trouble. So,
Hey, big trouble, all right? Something we definitely want to keep in mind. Jennifer.
Sometimes we got mail filters. For some email is to me with one filter to one folder, and CC to me is another folder.
Oh, okay, so it goes into a different folder.
Yeah, so
This is another little twist.
yes, so sometimes we really choosing the emails which is to me probably more important, so I check it first. And CC to me kind of less important, so I check it later.
Good.
Sometimes.
All right, so,
just check.
okay, but what are the results though? If you get, someone CCs you when you think they should have put you in the to field, how does that make you interpret that message in a way
Left
that
out.
is problematic? Left out? Yes.
Or if it's like the other way around. You're like, wait, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, why am I supposed to do something? I thought it was just being kept in the loop. I thought it was advising you. So it's problematic for two reasons. One, because it's confusing. And two, perhaps more importantly for you all, it sends the message that you don't understand how to run this team, or you don't understand how to communicate effectively with people who are involved in this project. And that's probably more problematic for you, something that you want to keep in mind. Dan?
Just another interesting dynamic with CC people where I work. So a lot of times I'll request some information from someone, and I'll send an email. The email is very clear what I want from them, and I don't hear back. And so a lot of times I'll send another email and I'll CC their manager. So it's like another way of reinforcing, like it's not to their manager, but their manager is now aware that they've received 2 emails.
Okay.
So a lot of times it gets their attention.
Good strategy. Double-edged sword there.
It can be dangerous.
It could be dangerous, but interesting tactic. Yes.
I do this also, it's like maybe not as effective, but if I request something from somebody and the first time they don't send it back, I might CC my boss on the email when I request it again for a follow-up.
Okay. Okay. Good.
So they see if they don't send it back.
Good. Similar strategy. I'd say that might be less dangerous than CCing the other person's boss, probably. But both effective strategies, but to be used very carefully. Okay. Any other comments on CC versus to field? Great ideas. I just wanted to generate this discussion and think about some best practices with both of those areas. So we'll talk about subject in a moment. We'll have a longer discussion about that. let's move on to the body of the email. Let's look at this salutation, dear so-and-so, dear hiring manager. What do you all like for salutations? Do you like dear? Do you like to? Do you like hey? What do you all like, and what do you think is the? Are there some good rules we can take away from it?
So what I usually do, it depends on my relationship with the person I'm emailing, is if I'm kind of friendly, even if it's a client, if I'm kind of friendly and I know them, I may be dear or hi. Internally, usually hi, because the company I work for is like not that big, so you kind of know the person personally.
Okay, so you like hi? Okay, do you like using the person's name?
Yeah. Hi, Eric.
Okay, so hi so-and-so is your preferred strategy for internal company emails? Crazy?
I think sometimes it depends on the culture of the because I was just not for all of them use dear or first name, and for Boeing they use hi as first name. So I think that's kind of.
And that's pretty consistent at Boeing. Hi, first name, last name. Johnson & Johnson is dear so-and-so. Okay, Karen?
That's the actual country culture.
Well, tell us about that. Like, this is a good chance to share.
So I've worked overseas in China for about 4 years, and I work for a Chinese company. So seniority is extremely important when you're talking to the VP. You have to use dear Mr. So-and-so or dear Dr. So-and-so. But if you're talking to your boss, it's also dear. But if I'm talking to my junior managers, I'm just using hey, blah blah blah. Or I just even just write the name, or I don't even sometimes write, dear, or I just reply to them because they're more junior than I am, so I can speak to them in a certain way that I cannot speak to them. I cannot speak to my boss or something. So I really
Okay. Good, good. So seniority is always important to keep in mind, especially as Carrie mentioned, with certain cultural dynamics. Well,
If it's a prospective customer, I'm done good morning, Mr. Brian, or Mr. Smith, for example. Good morning, everyone.
okay. Well,
Yes, I was going to say that sometimes instead of saying hi, you should say, you can say like good morning, good afternoon, good evening, so you don't have to deal with either dear or hi.
Yes, yes, I like this strategy. So I would say overall, dear is very formal, and Mr., Mrs., Doctor is erring on the side of formality. The person's name is a good middle road, and hi would probably be the least formal. And I would say hi is something you want to use carefully. But Olga introduced this other strategy, good morning, good afternoon, to avoid that if you're not sure. I think these are great things to keep in mind. Anyone have further suggestions on that?
I think it depends on the context you're in the email. For example, if something is really very informal, you can use hi to the friend. But if something is very important and business, you probably use dear because probably it's now will be forward to someone else, to customers or someone else. So we can feel that email description is very professional.
Good point. Okay, so it does set a tone for the context of the email. I like it. Good thoughts. Yeah.
I just feel like I hardly see, majority of my emails are from internal employees. I hardly ever see anybody here in the first line. It's usually just hi or straight to the name.
Yeah. So a less formal company very rarely would have dear. And I would say that's something to keep in mind, Alicia.
I try to always use a name in the beginning if it's going to more than one person. That way, going back to, I guess, like the two in the CC, especially if you have more than one person in the two, you don't know necessarily who you're directing it to. So, like, I try to always put the name of who the email is really supposed to be for, even if I'm using two in CC, just so that, like, it eliminates any confusion. And then if it's more than one person, I might put, Allie/Matt or something with a comma, and then, or if it's like to everybody, I'll put all, like, something like a good morning all, and then everything.
I think that's a great point. So if this email might be forwarded on, using the name is good, even if it's someone that you're friends with, even if it's a very informal email. I would always put the name. I would never, personally, I never start an email always put the name. That's the nice form.
Using people's names if you're replying is use whatever name they sign as. So, like a lot of email systems within the company will have the person's full name. So when you initially write them with their full name, you don't know if they go by something else. But if they reply to you and they use like a nickname, then you reply again. Make sure you use their nickname, otherwise they feel like you don't care about them.
Yeah, great strategy.
So my full name is Alexandra, but I go by Allie, so I get that all the time. And then some people say like Alexander, so they don't even get the name right. So you want to make sure you get the name right.
Okay. Alexander. So do people, for the most part, do they change it after you reply to them and realize that you go by Alex?
Some do. Some will even acknowledge it and apologize. Some people like don't even care. They just keep going and they.
Or Alex?
Yeah, they go by anything they want to go by. Yeah, people spell me.
Okay, good. All right, so years from now, when Allie is the executive of her company, keep that in mind if you're trying to send an email.
So I had a question. With emailing, you know how you just go back and forth. When do you stop saying dear blah blah blah? Just get straight to the point.
You know, I always, as a rule, like saying the person's name. I very rarely, someone earlier said, I forget who said it, you'll rarely see dear in their company. I think Jen said that. I don't like dear unless it's very formal. I just always put the person's name, and in replying, I like to always put that person's name as well. I have heard arguments that that gets a little too much. Does anyone want to make that argument right now?
So the thing is, like, you're replying with one sentence, but it's like hi or dear blah blah, and then yeah, do that, and then it's like best or like sincere or whatever. I mean, I see that's the thing I struggle with, is that I don't know when to stop.
But, and you could make it tighter by just putting the person's first name and then dash RP. But some people think if it's gone back and forth 2 or 3 times, you don't need to put the person's name, you don't need to put your name. I'd say that's an acceptable worldview as well. All right, good. So we're going to talk about the body of the email and how we might handle sensitive subjects in a moment. Let's look now at the signature. And let's talk some best practices on signature. How do we like this Susan Smith signature? Rajesh.
Sometimes it happens that you already have your name in the format,
Mm-hmm.
and you forget to again try your name, so it's always double there. Right?
Oh, okay. So it looks a little repetitive, and maybe she should have signed this just Susan, and then had her full signature there. Yeah.
Her job title's not included.
Okay, you like job titles included?
I don't think I actually have my job title included, but that's what I noticed. Because I don't have one.
Okay.
I don't know what the best practice is on that stuff.
Well, also keep in mind, I guess this person is looking for a job, so she may not have a job, or maybe she wants to keep it nondescript.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So I guess that's okay. But look, unencrypted. It's big? Yeah, so it's like, oh yeah, that's just my footnote. But to the point you might have made, I think it is too big. It's 5 lines, and I like a 1-line signature. I like to put everything on 1 line, so if you're going back and forth, it's less space, and your email can be seen as more efficient, and it's easier on the recipient. Yes. So address, unless it's necessary, I wouldn't put it. Absolutely, Alicia?
So I've seen in the companies that I worked for that when the first email goes out, they have the signature, and then once you reply back, the signature is removed.
So sometimes I'll take it off when I do that, but I've never actually experienced a system that would do that. So
Yeah,
you do the same thing? Or
yeah,
your
it's
company does the
usually
same thing?
company does the same thing. It's first time you email, you have your signature, but after that, it's just not.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic invention. And if you don't have that, it's sometimes a good idea to actually remove it. Especially if you work for a company that has a really long legal disclaimer. Anyone ever had one of those back and forth?
It's like one sentence message,
Yeah.
and then it's like this big.
Yeah. So either work for a company that already does that for you, or take it off. Good. Other comments?
What about that repeated business? Like you have your name twice, right? Is that okay or?
This here's Susan Smith, and then Susan Smith.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, someone suggested that maybe Susan would be better, because the Susan Smith.
Most of the mails that I see, they don't have twice.
So wait, are you suggesting take the name off the?
Yeah, I mean it should not be like a different part of the signature that separately. It should be a separate. Then I think
Okay, so what you're saying is take this off, remove this from the signature. What do we think about that? Rajesh suggests take the name off the signature.
and then take out the line also.
Olga?
I was thinking to take email too, because when you send email, there should be email already, you know? You have that information.
Oh, because you've got the from?
Yes, it looks too overwhelming, I would say.
Okay. Okay, Allie?
So in my job, I email a lot with like VL groups with other companies. So it's not necessarily that I'm emailing a certain person, but I'm emailing a group of people, and it's like, you know, Rutgers@whatever.com. And so I like the person's email on the bottom, because when the person replies back from that like group email, they have their individual information, you know, like that. And so then for future reference, if I need to contact them individually, I have their email.
Yes, all right, so I've definitely heard that argument before, that even though the email could be found possibly in the from field of your email inbox, sometimes if you're going across companies, it may be harder or impossible to find. And then, where were we? Were we talking about, we're still addressing the question of the name. Do we like the name in the email? Rosie?
What about removing the first name line altogether, and then sincerely first and last name and the date?
So, removing this?
No, the first one.
Removing this?
And the line.
Okay.
And the line.
And the line.
And the line.
Yeah.
And then sincerely?
Exactly.
All right. Personally, I like having the name signed, and I like having the name on the signature. Because if you remove the name, the signature part, remove this one, it's obvious that the email body has done. It's obvious that you've completed your message. And it just looks awkward, and to me feels awkward, if you don't sign your name at the end of the email. When people look at the signature, they know that that's just a generic signature that you send to everyone. I think signing off with your name is important, and I would personally recommend it. I would also recommend that you have your name at the top of your format template signature. If for no other reason than that's what it's called, it's your signature. It's the important information about it. I like having the name, Allie likes having the email. I think phone number is important if that's a way that your contacts or customers contact you. Gracie, what do you think?
Would it be better if I could drop title in the sometimes
Yeah, I think job title is a good thing to have on a signature as well. Okay.
So I know in my personal email, what I have is the signature is a completely different font and the color.
Okay.
So it separates it from your whole text.
I'd agree with that. So I have a little bit different font. In addition to one line, I have a little bit different font and different font for each part so that it's easier for the reader to understand. So I would agree with that. I would say I do that as well. Sendu?
How about checking numbers? When you put the code of the country, checking numbers for the international.
All right. So we've got some people who do international business here. What do we think? Do we need the country code under the phone number?
I was asked to add this.
Absolutely, Kerr says.
Yes, you have to. I deal with clients all over the place, and if I don't put the country code, they have no idea who to reach. So I always put the country code for that phone section, the country code is extremely important.
Okay, good. So I think it comes down to the people that you're emailing. People that carry emails need that country code. People that alley emails will often need an extra specific copy of that person's email. Comes down to understanding your audience. So these are some great ideas. Let's move on to, what do we got? Let's move on to memo. We're going to go over some basics of a memo, just really quickly. We won't spend much time on this, just so you're familiar with it. And then we'll talk about how we deal with what might be sensitive material in the body of both an email and a memo. So memo is similar to an email. We might have heading at the top. We might have name, your name, your title. We've got a date, we've got a to, we've got a from, we've got a subject. Now in a memo, we don't have a salutation typically. We don't have dear, we don't have to. Does anyone know why that is? Jim?
Because it's on the top one. Well,
Yeah.
it's below the date.
Yes, it is. Now it is also on an email, but for whatever reason, the culture, the way an email is developed, we still use salutations for email. But because a memo is typically presented in a more formal format, like this whole piece of paper, we won't use a salutation. And also, we won't sign off as well. We won't put our name at the bottom. The CC, on this particular memo, it's at the bottom, but could also be below the to field. All of those are acceptable. Any questions on just the format of a memo? Now, in general, a memo is going to be more formal. It's going to be less personal. And also, a memo is less interactive. So when we send a memo, we don't necessarily expect a response. It may be the start of a dialogue, the start of a discussion. With an email, obviously, it's more interactive. Someone might hit reply and reply back to us. So we need to take that into account when we think of how we want to structure our email versus how we want to structure our memo. So let's think about how we talk about the body, or how we talk about subjects in actually writing emails. And I will propose that we always have a business need when writing in either an email or a memo, and that is what will dictate what we're writing. Sometimes we want to transfer information. Our recipient needs to know certain things. A recipient may need to do certain things, or we may think the recipient may need to feel a certain way. Talk about these first two quickly and briefly. If our recipient needs to know something, I suggest we just think about that in terms of understanding that that is our goal. A variety of ways we can make the information clear. And when you're proofreading your email, think to yourself, all right, my goal is to make sure that the recipient understands and knows. Is it clear? Same thing with needed action. We need our recipient to do something. When you go back to the proofread your email, just understand that as your goal. Will this person respond like I want them to respond? Fill out the survey like I hope they fill out the survey? Understand that the need to do something is important. Now for the need to feel, we will talk about that a little bit more in depth, and you have a couple of assignments related to that. I chose these words carefully. You may need to persuade or assuage your audience. So persuade, of course, means convince your audience that your point of view is correct. Assuage means lessen the impact of a bad situation. So you may be sending an email, you didn't get a job, you're getting laid off, something difficult, something bad is happening. So we want to lessen the impact of that. Because for some reason it might be important that you keep a positive relationship with the recipients and the audience. You need them to feel good about this situation for some sort of business need. So we'll spend a few minutes discussing how we do that. Let me start with some suggestions from you all. How do we persuade or assuage our audience to convince them to feel a certain way if we're sending them a memo or an some techniques we can use.
Put the job on
But there, okay, excuse me. If you don't do it right, you're fired. Okay, all right. Possible strategy, Matthew?
Like perspective, I feel like going into it, you have to, like, maybe you're looking at something the opposite of what is happening, and just say how your thought process was.
Okay, explain. Explain why you're doing what you're doing, and ideally get them to agree with you and say, gosh, if I were in Matthew's shoes, I would have done the same thing. Too bad I'm fired, but I understand. I understand his thought process. I understand his logic. Fantastic.
Maybe support your thought process or their rationale with the numbers, so those factual things.
Excellent point. So explain the thought process, explain your rationale, and support your rationale. Jim?
Include the deadline. Like if you're sending like a second or third follow-up and you still haven't returned your email, you could ask again and say because the deadline is today at noon.
Okay, so I might put that in specify needed action. So you need them to do something, but even though they know that they need to reply by a certain time, what's the icing on the cake, Jim, that you use to actually get them to do it? We used examples of persuade with logic, put their job on the line. But
if it's not a job, you show how else it affects them, how it might affect like a future task or some responsibility that's coming up.
okay, good. Show benefits.
If you have a rhetorical statement in the end, like will you do it or can you suggest me by when it could be done? So you would definitely get the response.
Okay, good. Good. Arpit?
So the way I usually try to get someone to do something is try to get them to feel that they're part of the whole project itself. It's even though you may not take their suggestion, but you go to them, ask for their opinions, and kind of make them feel like they're part of the team. They're helping out, and that way they kind of feel included.
Okay, right. Make them feel part of the team.
It's
Outstanding.
messed up, but
Adjust the focus to them, Matthew.
Be a little dramatic, and know that you're being dramatic too. Like know that you're not being over emotional because it's a fine line, I feel like. And then like at the same time, you get to show your passion towards it. Like just explain repercussions and how bad you feel, and then but at the same time, it's okay, moving forward.
Okay, so some good thoughts there. Be dramatic though. I'm trying to get my head around that one. You have maybe a rule that could guide us. When do we be dramatic? When do we not be dramatic? Sort of how do we use this tool of being passionate versus not passionate?
I feel like if there's repercussions, that's really bad. Like if you don't get your way, then something really bad will happen on top of that. Then you can be dramatic by explaining what will happen, and then be like this will be a complete detriment to it because it doesn't happen.
Okay, so explain your rationale and explain the importance of the rationale. Good stuff. So what do I have here? Show understanding. I understand this may be difficult for you. Illustrate that you've thought it through. And explain your rationale. We already talked about that one. And just these three we spent a lot of time talking about already. I've considered your point of view. I understand this may be difficult for you, but I want to explain my rationale and perhaps support it with some numbers. Be truthful. When you're delivering bad news especially, you don't want your recipient to catch you in a lie. Nothing can be more aggravating than getting difficult news and have the person who's reading this email figure out, well, wait a minute, you said this, but you said this last time, this person is lying to me, and I'm in a bad mood because I'm getting demoted. Very important to avoid that. Offer alternatives if you have them. I'm sorry that this product didn't work out for you. I'm sorry this position didn't work out for you. But if you have alternatives and you can be truthful about them, it's a good strategy. Buffers. What are buffers? I've used buffers before. So a buffer is, I've got bad news for you, but I'm going to start off with a positive, and I'm going to end with a positive. So, pitch. I think you're a great student overall, but there was a problem with your assignments, and this is the problem, blah, blah, blah. By the way, I think your watch looks great. So, sandwich, I've heard the term sandwich. You sandwich the bad news.
Maybe job posting or something like they say this is we consider you and stuff like that. But then at the end, like, we look forward to update with any opportunities.
Yeah.
Which is that.
All right, so that's an example of the buffer. The question I have for you is, do we want to use a buffer? Is a buffer a good thing to use, a bad thing to use? Agreed. Okay, so it's very helpful if you're giving constructive feedback. I would say if you can be sincere about it, a buffer is useful. Like if you truly have something good to say about this person, then it's okay to start it off. If you don't, and it's obvious that you're just using that to warm the person up, it might aggravate them even more. So I think the thinking on buffers, if you can be sincere about it, use it. If it's an obvious ploy, try to lessen the impact, then be careful about it. Arpit?
So when I'm like reviewing stuff or reviewing a slide deck or giving my opinion, I feel like using what I call the sandwich method, the person that I'm giving my opinion to is more receptive of it. So if I tell them, no, look, the slide deck itself is in great shape, you did well, but I think I would kind of expand on blah, 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 but overall, it's me.
Okay.
Something like that, they're more receptive.
Okay, and I think that's a great example of a true compliment, right? It truly is great overall, but you need to work on this. Blake?
I think the buffer only works if the bad news is ultimately received. So if you're trying to say like an assignment or submission is inadequate, it's fine to say that you're a fine overall employee and you're doing a great job, but here's the flaw here. As long as that flaw is communicated or whatever the real issue like sits with them, then the buffer could work. But if they're just too focused on the sandwich pieces, then
okay, if they're like, so if they're focused on the good news, and think that you're giving them
they might
a compliment.
believe that that's the reason that you're having that conversation.
Yeah, especially if you're doing some sort of employee disciplinary action and you start the conversation off with, you've done well at this, they might walk away from that conversation thinking they were getting a compliment. That could be a serious problem. So this all comes down to business need. This section we're discussing on audience sensitivity, it's all to serve the business need. And right now we're saying we need to persuade or assuage them somehow. And if they don't understand because of the buffer, then that could be a serious problem. Great point. Indirect rejection, another tactic we can use. Instead of saying, no, you cannot have Friday off, we might say, unfortunately, I need at least 7 days notice in order to give you time off. As long as the rejection is clear, then you can do it indirectly like that. Another strategy, someone said something like this earlier, adjust audience emphasis. What I mean by that, if you have bad news for the recipient, avoid excessive use of the word you. So don't say, you were late on this project, you came in over budget, you didn't come up with any good ideas, and now you're the reason why I have to start over. Instead, you might say, unfortunately, this project was late. Unfortunately, this project came in a little bit over budget. Unfortunately, we now have to start from the beginning. And as long as the recipient understands, I got a comment from a friend years and years ago. He told me, it was just like that email reached out and smacked me in the face. And it was because of my usage of the word you. Like, you're irresponsible, you're the one who lost this money. It's like, oh, just like the email just smacked me in the face. So adjusting the audience emphasis can be something that will work to your advantage. Any further comments on this? Subject lines. Very important part of our emails, of our memos, frames the issue for us. I want to say a few words on how we might decide on the subject line. We want our subject to be relevant to the issue, relevant to the person that we're sending the email to. We also want it to be as concise as possible. So relevant, meaning When this person reads the subject, they say, oh, that's worthy of me opening this email. And concise enough that they can glean that information very, very quickly. A textbook I used to work out of recommended email subject lines of 35 characters or less. Over 35 characters, emails were much less likely to be opened. Under 35 characters, because they're concise, the recipient can understand quickly what you're trying to say, and much more likelihood of being opened. So we want it to be as relevant as possible. We want to do that as quickly and concisely as possible. In the subject of an email or a memo, we've talked about topic versus thesis. In this case, what do you all think? Do we want the topic in our subject of our email, or do we want the thesis in the subject of our email? Topic, Rebecca? What do you think's topic? I would say mostly topic. It's the rule of thumb, but mostly we are used to receiving information that way. We can get our brain around it. We know where it fits, especially if it's been, the CC in the to field has been categorized correctly. It helps us receive that information more effectively. Especially if that information is bad news, we want to frame for it. Surprising bad news can elicit an especially negative reaction if you just hit them in the face with it in a subject of your email without framing it. Let's take a look at some examples, see if we like these subject lines for our emails. Do we like that one? No. It's the conclusion, and just reach out and smack you in the face. How about this one? Yeah. Much better. How about this one? Notes. Too general. All right, it may not be relevant to me. And unless you're someone very important or very senior to me, I may not even open this email. But
what if that's received from a classmate?
okay, so you have a context. You know that this person is in your business communications class and you have a project coming up, so you may understand it right away, but you may not. You may interact with this person in multiple classes.
Yeah, I would do notes for blah, blah, blah class. Expand a little more.
Yeah. Jim?
Well, I don't like when people do this, when like they ask for a document, they put what document they're looking for in the subject, and then the whole body of the email is just, can you send me this?
Okay.
So they don't even like describe it in the email.
Okay. Okay.
I don't like that.
Okay. Okay. So, all right, that's an interesting one. Perhaps if it's a very simple request, that might work. But if it's a more complicated request, at least one person votes against it, and I would vote against it as well. We might use something like this: Finance Committee notes this date, as opposed to just notes. How about this one? Elevator out of service January 12th and 13th. Do we like this one? Rajesh likes it. I heard murmurs if it's too much. Matthew?
I mean, if you're working for a company and they just want to get it out there, then yeah. Because then you don't have to be a whole
Yeah, I wanted to throw this in as an example of the violation of topic versus thesis in the subject, and say that this one, not too bad. It's just something very simple. You need the information. Boom, you've got it. Well, I'm definitely not going to try moving January 12th and 13th. I can rearrange my plans. How about this one? No hot water in January. So similar thing. The thesis is in the subject of the email. Might we want to just, apply the same logic as the previous one? We could. Matthew, what do you think?
Be too pissed off.
Yes. That's what I'm going for with this one. It's the same concept. We just want to get someone might want to just get the information out, but it's potentially very bad news. No hot water in January. So you might want to frame that topic and then explain why. Well, much needed building improvements. This is going to be better for everyone, so sorry for the inconvenience. Here's some alternatives. Boil your bath water on the stove, or something like that. All right, good. So I want to go over, just briefly talk about the bad news email and the corporate change memo that's going to be due in a few weeks. when looking at the syllabus, because of some other assignments that are coming up, I think the bad news email is due 2 weeks from today, and the corporate change memo is due 3 weeks from today. And definitely there are some ways I could have structured that more effectively, but that's what it is. And so at the end of class next week, I will read through the bad news email and remind you of this stuff. And then 2 weeks from now, I'll read through the corporate change memo and remind you of this stuff. But for now, I will say, on both these assignments, you're graded on choosing an effective subject line, keeping the things we talked about in mind. You need to satisfy a business need. You need to communicate important information. And in both these cases, there's an audience sensitivity that is important. The bad news email, you've got a really angry client who's an important customer, so you need to be sensitive. For the corporate change memo, you've got a bunch of people who might lose their jobs, and you want them to have as positive an experience as possible. If they're going to lose their job, and the employees that are going to stay, you want to keep them on your side, you want to keep them happy. So unless there's any questions on that, I will save a full preview of both those for the following weeks. Okay, so now I want to expand our discussion of effective communications to other things besides emails and memos. We'll talk briefly about text messaging, talk briefly about social media posts and messaging, and we'll think about a framework we can use to evaluate the success of all of them. And I want to start that by discussing this topic of the advantages and disadvantages of in-person or not in-person communication. And think about what we're working against. When we send an email, we send a memo, we send a text message, social media, what disadvantages we're dealing with and how we overcome those disadvantages. And I will say to start our discussion that we have an advantage of these types of messages of efficiency. And it's very efficient. It's very important for our culture, our business, our society, and we're never ever going back. We're never going to stop using these messages, these types of communication for, I guess, other in-person communication all the time. But there's some disadvantages we need to consider. So what are the disadvantages of our not in-person messages, such as emails, memos, texts, all that kind of stuff? Matthew?
Misinterpretations.
Yeah, why are there more misinterpretation possibilities for not in-person messages, communication?
Body language.
Okay, so body language. You can't read the body language? Fantastic. Can't read the tone? Excellent.
Words may mean different things when they're on paper and when they're spoken.
Okay, very good. Other thoughts? Blake?
Might have been emphasis put on a different topic, like you might think it's one thing, but it's another, and both are communicating the same message.
Oh, good point. Good point. So we've got lack of verbal cues, lack of auditory cues, situational awareness. Is this an important situation? Is this a casual situation? Response delay. What does that mean when I don't get a response back? Additional coding problems. I want to talk about this idea of coding, and someone mentioned words mean different things when they're written down versus when we have them. So to continue to warm up our discussion of other mediums of communication, we've talked about overall disadvantages of not in-person communication. I want to introduce a diagram to give us a means to evaluate the success and lack of success of this type of messaging. I want to explain this diagram, and then I want to tell you why I chose to use it for this class. So this is a very classic diagram for communication. We've got a sender who wants to send some sort of message. That person encodes it somehow. The person chooses a medium to communicate the message. There might be noise interfering with that message. The receiver has to decode the message, encode the response, send it back, so on and so forth. All of this takes place within a certain context. So that's the diagram, that's how it works. And let me tell you that I never imagined teaching with this type of diagram. This is something that was created, I don't know, hundreds of years ago. It was in textbook decades ago. And when I got into this business, I looked at this and I said, that's not something I ever need to teach with. This is old. I teach new cutting edge stuff. But as I was evaluating how we can think about good social media, good text messaging, good emails, I found myself forced to come back to this because it's an effective way to frame our discussion. We can think about whether or not we've encoded the message correctly. We can think about how the person who received it had a different metric for decoding the message. We can think about whether we used the right medium or the wrong medium. We can think about how our feedback helped or hurt us. And we can think about different interpretations of context. So even though this is a very simple dialogue, it will help frame our discussion for what's good communication and what's bad communication. And I want to propose to you that getting all these components right is the way to make any message effective. So what that means, what I'm saying, is that there's really no inappropriate message. If the receiver says, oh, that message was inappropriate, that message didn't hit me the right way, it's not that the message itself was inappropriate, it's that something went wrong with your choice of medium, something went wrong with the coding process, something went wrong with the context process. If anyone wants to challenge me on that, we can have this discussion. Is there such thing as a truly inappropriate message? Or is it all due to problems with one of these areas? Take it by your silence that you agree. So let's think about some of these. Inappropriate messages, this is just what I said. Medium problems. Okay, so we're going to, with that, we're going to discuss problems that happen with this choice of medium, problems that happen with the coding process, problems that might happen with different interpretations of the context. So let's first start with medium problems. The medium is the message. This guy, Marshall McLennan, said this apparently in 1964, very well-known expert at the time. And it's even more relevant today with the more mediums we have for communication. So if you get an email from your boss saying, hey, that report needs a little bit more work next time, that's one message. Suppose your boss actually picks up the phone and calls you and says, hey, that report needs a little more work next time. It's a slightly different message. Suppose your boss says, can you come to my office? There's something I need to talk to you about. And she or he says, that report needs a little more work next time. That's a different message. So the medium you choose to communicate has an important bearing on the message. Coding problems. Problems with the way we code our message or the way the message is decoded. Sometimes people just have a different method of coding. Suppose we have a language difference. I code something one way, you code something the other way. Medium evaluation. So I thought we were just chatting on Facebook. We're all kind of friends, just letting it all hang out. So I coded it in a very informal way. Well, actually that didn't hit me the right way for some reason. Context assessment. So I thought this was a family gathering. We could just talk about family stuff. Well, actually this is a funeral. So, context is a little different. Didn't understand it quite the right way. And the other party assessment. So I thought you were the type of person who I could talk informally to. Actually, I'm not. Voting a mistake. Mistakes are important. Mistakes could have a huge effect on our effectiveness of communication. Just have an error. You misunderstand an acronym. You make an error when you're typing out your email. By the time you get a chance to correct it, your colleague, your friend, your boss could already be really mad at you because you made a simple mistake. Coding over confidence. Very big problem. What do I mean by coding over confidence?